The year was 1588, and the most powerful empire on earth was preparing to invade England. King Philip II of Spain commanded the mightiest naval force ever assembled, a seemingly invincible armada of 130 warships carrying over 30,000 men. Their mission was simple: crush Protestant England, dethrone Queen Elizabeth I, and restore Catholic dominance across Europe. Spain controlled vast territories from the Americas to the Philippines, possessed limitless gold from New World mines, and fielded the most feared military forces of the age. England, by contrast, was a small island nation with a modest fleet, outnumbered and outgunned. No rational observer gave the English a chance of survival. Yet what unfolded over the following weeks would become one of history's most stunning reversals. A David versus Goliath struggle that would reshape the balance of European power for centuries to come and prove that even the mightiest empire could be brought to its knees. The roots of this epic confrontation stretched back decades. Philip II of Spain wasn't just any monarch. He was the most powerful ruler in the Western world, governing an empire where the sun never set. His domains included Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, parts of Italy, vast colonies throughout the Americas, and the Philippines in Asia. Spanish galleons transported mountains of silver and gold from mines in Peru and Mexico, filling Philip's treasury with seemingly endless wealth. The Spanish tercios, his elite infantry units, were considered invincible on European battlefields. Philip saw himself as the defender of Catholic Christianity against the rising tide of Protestantism that threatened to tear Europe apart. When England broke from Rome under Henry VIII and his daughter Elizabeth I embraced Protestantism, Philip viewed it as both a religious heresy and a political threat. But the relationship between Spain and England deteriorated further when English privateers, basically state-sponsored pirates with royal approval, began attacking Spanish treasure ships crossing the Atlantic. Francis Drake, the most notorious of these sea dogs, had circumnavigated the globe while plundering Spanish colonial ports, bringing home fortunes that filled Elizabeth's coffers. The Spanish called Drake el Drac, the dragon, and Philip placed an enormous bounty on his head. The final straw came when Elizabeth executed Mary, Queen of Scots, a Catholic claimant to the English throne, in 1587. Philip decided England must be conquered, Elizabeth removed, and Catholicism restored by force. The Spanish Armada that assembled in Lisbon Harbor in 1588 was genuinely awe-inspiring. Philip spared no expense in creating this invasion force. The fleet consisted of 130 ships divided into squadrons from different regions of his empire. There were massive galleons bristling with cannons, Portuguese carracks, Neapolitan galleasses with both sails and oars, supply vessels, and troop transports. Aboard these ships were approximately 8,000 sailors and 19,000 soldiers, many of them veterans of campaigns in the Netherlands and Italy. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The Armada would sail up the English Channel to the Netherlands, where it would rendezvous with the Duke of Parma's army of 27,000 battle-hardened Spanish troops. These soldiers would board the ships and cross to England for a full-scale invasion. With Spanish forces established on English soil, Philip believed Elizabeth's government would collapse within weeks. The Armada's commander was the Duke of Medina Sidonia, an experienced administrator but, ironically, a man who suffered from seasickness and had little naval combat experience. He accepted the command reluctantly, knowing the enormous pressure resting on his shoulders. England's response to this existential threat revealed both desperation and cunning. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, had ruled for 3 decades through a combination of political brilliance, careful diplomacy, and strategic ambiguity. Now, in her mid-50s, she faced the greatest crisis of her reign. England's navy was smaller and could muster perhaps 34 royal warships plus armed merchant vessels that were pressed into service. The English couldn't match Spanish firepower in a traditional broadside battle, so they would need to rely on superior seamanship, faster ships, and innovative tactics. Command of the English fleet went to Lord Howard of Effingham, a capable nobleman, with Francis Drake serving as Vice Admiral. Drake was a controversial choice because his piratical activities had helped provoke this crisis. But no one understood Spanish tactics better, or possessed his aggressive fighting spirit. The English ships had one crucial advantage. They were purpose-built warships designed for Atlantic conditions, lower to the water, more maneuverable, and equipped with longer-range cannons than their Spanish counterparts. Spanish galleons were built higher, making them excellent platforms for boarding actions, where Spanish infantry could overwhelm opponents in hand-to-hand combat. But these same high structures made them less stable and more vulnerable to English gunnery tactics. When the Spanish Armada finally set sail in May 1588, disaster struck almost immediately. Terrible storms scattered the fleet, forcing it to take shelter in Corunna for repairs. This delay gave England precious weeks to prepare defenses and allowed English commanders to refine their battle plans. When the Armada finally entered the English Channel in late July, English scouts spotted the massive formation off the Cornish coast. Beacons blazed across the English countryside, warning signals that the invasion had begun. The Spanish fleet sailed in a massive crescent formation, a defensive arrangement designed to protect vulnerable supply ships. At the center, while presenting a wall of armed galleons to any attacker, this formation was nearly impregnable to frontal assault, exactly what Medina Sidonia intended. The English fleet emerged from Plymouth Harbor, maneuvering to get the weather gauge, the advantageous upwind position that would allow them to control when and how to engage. Over the next week, a running battle developed as both fleets moved slowly up the channel toward the rendezvous point with Parma's army. The English tactics frustrated and bewildered the Spanish. Rather than closing for the traditional grappling and boarding combat where Spanish infantry would dominate, English ships stood off at longer range, using their superior maneuverability and longer-range cannons to pound the Spanish formation. Drake and his captains would dart in, unleash devastating broadsides, then sail away before Spanish ships could respond effectively. It was naval guerrilla warfare, death by 1,000 cuts. The Spanish formation held, but cracks were beginning to show. English gunnery damaged several galleons, and the Spanish were expending ammunition at an alarming rate without inflicting corresponding damage on their nimble opponents. Medina Sidonia pressed forward, determined to reach the Netherlands and link up with Parma's invasion force. On July 27th, the Armada anchored off Calais, tantalizingly close to its objective. But here, the Spanish faced an unexpected problem. The Duke of Parma's army wasn't ready. His troops were scattered across the Netherlands. Their transport barges were blockaded by Dutch rebel ships, and coordinating the rendezvous proved impossible. The great Spanish plan was coming apart. The English commanders recognized this moment as their opportunity. On the night of July 28th, they launched one of the most audacious attacks in naval warfare history. The English took 8 older vessels, loaded them with pitch, tar, gunpowder, and anything combustible, set them ablaze, and sent them drifting on the tide, directly toward the densely packed Spanish fleet anchored off Calais. Spanish lookouts spotted the burning ships approaching through the darkness, and panic spread through the Armada. Medina Sidonia had prepared for this possibility, with small boats ready to tow away fireships before they could reach the fleet. But the English had overloaded these ships with extra gunpowder. As the fireships approached, their guns began exploding from the heat, sending flaming debris in all directions. Spanish captains, terrified of being burned alive, cut their anchor cables and scattered in all directions to escape the inferno. The fireship attack didn't destroy any Spanish vessels, but it achieved something far more valuable. It broke the Armada's disciplined formation and created chaos throughout the fleet. Dawn on July 29th revealed the Spanish fleet scattered and disorganized off Gravelines. The English pounced. In the Battle of Gravelines, English ships closed to much shorter range than before, hammering the Spanish vessels with devastating firepower. For hours, the battle raged, with English cannons tearing through Spanish hulls. Several Spanish ships were sunk or driven aground. The Spanish fought bravely, but their formation was broken, and they couldn't bring their superior numbers to bear effectively. Medina Sidonia attempted to rally his fleet, but the wind was shifting, pushing the Armada toward the treacherous sandbanks of the Flemish coast. Destruction seemed inevitable then, miraculously for the Spanish. The wind changed direction, allowing them to claw away from the shoals. But any hope of renewing the invasion was gone. The English had effectively won. Medina Sidonia faced a grim reality. His fleet was damaged. Supplies were running low. Ammunition was nearly exhausted, and the English fleet still blocked the channel. He made the only decision possible: retreat. But returning through the English Channel was impossible, with English ships controlling those waters. The Armada would have to sail north around Scotland and Ireland to reach Spain, a journey of thousands of miles through some of the world's most dangerous waters. The voyage home became a nightmare. Fierce Atlantic storms battered the already damaged Spanish ships. Without proper charts of the Scottish and Irish coasts, many vessels were driven onto rocks. Ships ran out of food and water. Disease spread through the cramped, unsanitary conditions. Sailors died by the hundreds. Some ships that wrecked on the Irish coast saw survivors massacred by English forces or local clans. Of the 130 ships that left Spain, fewer than 67 returned. Over 15,000 men perished, most not in battle, but in the horrific journey home. It was one of the greatest naval disasters in history. The defeat of the Spanish Armada fundamentally altered European history. Spain remained a major power, but the myth of Spanish invincibility was shattered forever. England emerged as a serious naval power, beginning its transformation into the maritime empire that would dominate the seas for the next 3 centuries. Protestant England survived, ensuring that Northern Europe would remain largely Protestant, and that religious pluralism would take root. The balance of power shifted away from Catholic Mediterranean powers toward Protestant Atlantic nations. English confidence soared. They had faced the mightiest empire on earth and prevailed. The victory was celebrated as divine intervention, with medals struck proclaiming God blew, and they were scattered. Philip II never abandoned his dreams of conquering England, launching 2 more failed armadas in the 1590s. But the moment had passed. Queen Elizabeth's reign entered its glorious final phase, the Elizabethan age that produced Shakespeare, Marlowe, and Spenser, and established England as a centre of culture and learning. The lessons of 1588 resonate across centuries. Superior numbers and resources don't guarantee victory when facing determined opponents using innovative tactics. Rigid adherence to plans can be disastrous when circumstances change. Weather and luck play enormous roles in human affairs, often as much as skill or courage. The Spanish Armada demonstrated that even superpowers can be defeated when they underestimate their opponents, fail to adapt to new realities, and when fortune turns against them. For England, the victory proved that a small nation with clever leadership, technological innovation, and sheer audacity could punch above its weight on the world stage. The echoes of those summer weeks in 1588, when English sailors battled impossible odds in the Channel waters, would inspire British resistance during later existential threats. From Napoleon's invasion plans to Hitler's Luftwaffe during the Blitz. The defeat of the Spanish Armada wasn't just a naval battle. It was the moment when the future shifted, when the age of Spanish dominance gave way to the coming British century, and when a small island nation proved that courage and cunning could overcome seemingly insurmountable power.